Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Earth Day Everyday webinar series. My name is Sal Mangiafico, and I'm with Rutgers Cooperative Extension. I'll be hosting the webinar this evening, and we are, of course, so glad you could be here tonight. Rutgers Cooperative Extension is part of the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station, so it is the outreach arm of Rutgers University. And we do have an office in every county in the state, so you'll feel free to call us or stop on in if you have a question, you want some science-based information, maybe about a gardening, home horticulture topic, or maybe you just found a really cool spider you'd like to know about. As you know, the theme for this evening or for this season's spring webinar series is some good news, environmental success stories in New Jersey. And actually, 2025 marks the 5th year of our webinar series. This webinar series is put together in cooperation with the Marine Extension Program Seminar Series. Um, and we're happy for their participation and support. Um, so a couple of housekeeping items. Everyone, all the participants are muted. If you have questions, please put them into the chat. So somewhere on your screen, you'll find an icon that looks like two kind of speech bubbles. That should say chat. That's the chat. If you have an option to send the chat to the host and co-hosts, go ahead and do that. And if you have any questions, we'll kind of wrangle them and we'll address them at the end with the speaker. All right, you can go ahead to the next slide. So near the end of the presentation, we'll launch a poll. Should pop up right on your screen, and we'll ask you to answer a couple of questions about what you learned during the webinar. Since we're collecting this information, Rutgers considers you to be research subjects. So the first question will ask for your consent that we can use the information you provide. We just use it in aggregate, how people answer the questions, and we report about that. Go ahead to the next slide. And of course, Rutgers is an equal opportunity program provider. If you have any questions about that, there's a phone number and a website on the screen, or you can contact the Cooperative Extension Office at Rutgers University with any questions or concerns that you have. We are recording tonight, and these recordings are put online. You can view them later if you would like to, or you can share them with your friends who may have missed it live tonight. One other thing I'll promote, if we just recently published a newsletter article about ways people can volunteer in different programs across the state that are environmentally related. So probably the easiest way to get to that, and I will try to put the link in the chat, but the easiest way to get to that, if you just Google Rutgers, you need the Rutgers Earth Day Every Day, and the page that comes up, there's a link right there that goes to the newsletter. So the most recent article is about um, a whole host of ways you can volunteer um, with environmental organizations and government organizations all across the state. With all that preliminary information, tonight I am excited to welcome Kathleen Kerwin. Kathleen is a certified associate wildlife biologist. She earned her master's degree in ecology and evolution from Rutgers University in 2014 and went on to work for the Rutgers Cooperative Extension Wildlife Conservation and Management Program for 9 years. She then served as supervisor for USDA's Spotted Lanternfly Control Program in New Jersey, and it has recently accepted a new role as project manager for Terra Casa, a native plant-focused and environmentally friendly garden design company based out of Monmouth County. And tonight she'll be speaking about recovery of some wildlife species in New Jersey. I probably won't remember to mention it at the end, so I'll just mention it now. Next week, we have Carl Anderson from NOAA, who will present about dam removal and restoration. So with that, thank you all, and I will turn it over to Kathleen.
Well, thank you, Sal. Thanks for having me, and we'll get right into it. So, just a general agenda. We're going to talk about each of these wildlife species. All three of them have had remarkable success going from basically absent in New Jersey to returning after great efforts were put to bring these species back. So first we'll go over the bald eagle, then the wild turkey, and then the bobcat. And for each of these, we will talk about the species ecology, life history, behavior, the conservation issue that caused their populations to crash, what the comeback was like and how that happened, and then just the current status of them in New Jersey today. So first off, bald eagles. Most people are very familiar with the bald eagle. It's a very charismatic animal. It's a very large bird. And of course, they were made the United States national emblem back in 1782 because they are a symbol of strength, courage, beauty, and freedom. And they're, again, large, hard to miss. Their taxonomic group is also known as the sea eagles or the fish eagles, and there are other species related to the bald eagle that could be found in other parts of the world. Bald in Old English actually means white, so that's how they got their name, the bald eagle. For habitat, bald eagles require a body of water. This could be a bay, a river, a lake, anywhere where they can find fish because that is their primary food source. And they need large trees, large mature trees to roost in. It just means perching on, but also to build their nests. They build the largest nest of any North American bird, up to 1 ton in weight, which is a very heavy nest. They tend to return to that same nest every year so they can build on it, and over time they just get very, very heavy. Female bald eagles are actually larger than the males. So this is kind of different than most other wildlife species, but they can be about 25% larger. So that's looking at 12 versus 9 pounds on average. It's thought that this just might help with reproduction. They also tend to be the more aggressive of the genders, and they're going to defend the nest very aggressively. But both male and female will help raise young and incubate the eggs. Their diet, again, is mostly fish, but they will also eat mammals, other birds, and they will scavenge whenever possible. They kind of like to use their weight. They're bigger than all the other birds out there that are eating fish. So ospreys, peregrine falcons, they're known to kind of wait and watch. And after those species of bird catch a fish, a bald eagle will swoop in and steal it. They generally mate for life starting when they're about 4 to 5 years old. That's when they hit sexual maturity. Of course, if a mate dies, they would find another mate. I believe there was some drama at the famous Duke Farms bald eagle pair where I believe it was the female got replaced by a new female. So some things do happen where they might break up, but in general, they form very strong pair bonds that typically last for the life of the bird. They lay eggs once a year, and it's 1 to 3 eggs each time. And they are long-lived, so they live about 20 years in the wild or even longer. The big environmental issue when it comes to bald eagles and other fish-eating birds is this thing called DDT. I put the long chemical name up here. I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but that's what DDT stands for. And it's an insecticide. It was used heavily starting in World War II to limit insect-borne disease among troops. So they were really targeting things like malaria and typhus. So malaria is spread by mosquitoes, typhus is spread by fleas and lice. So they were treating people with this DDT, and it was just helping to prevent disease. After the war, it became heavily used in agriculture and also in household pest control from the 50s to the 80s, and this was done worldwide. And actually, the scientists who discovered the insecticidal properties of DDT got a Nobel Peace Prize because it was so effective in limiting disease. So this was kind of hailed as a really miraculous compound that could help people not get sick. It's still produced in some countries, so actually just produced in India, but it's used in some African countries and also in India. I believe it's heavily regulated and should be only used for vector control. So again, used around houses and in these really controlled manners to decrease insects that cause disease. But luckily, it's much less prevalent in the environment now. Here's just some old photos, kind of interesting. Like people from this generation often talk about, trucks going through their neighborhood, spraying DDT and this big fog, and it was fun for the kids to play in. And it's kind of hard to imagine that happening nowadays, but it did happen, and nobody really knew the issues behind it. Here's a picture of a soldier, again, just treating someone's clothes and hair, trying to get rid of those pest insects that carry disease. The problem with DDT is this process called biomagnification. And biomagnification just describes the process when a chemical or a contaminant in a water source gets concentrated as it moves up the food chain. So DDT, was sprayed all over the place, neighborhoods, agriculture. Eventually, it would run off into a water source, and it would be found at very low levels. Like in this example, it's 0.000003 parts per million, so very low concentration. But as that gets kind of taken up by the phytoplankton in the water, which get eaten by the zooplankton, which then get eaten up by small fish, and then larger fish, and then eventually birds of prey. By the time you get to that bird of prey, you're looking at 25 parts per million. So that indicates a 10 million times increase in concentration. The problem is DDT just isn't excreted readily. It's stored in the fatty tissue, so that's why it just gets more and more magnified as you go up the food chain. And for birds of prey that eat fish, the DDT affects their calcium metabolism. And this results in very thin eggshells, which I'll show you an example of on the next page. And not just eagles, but ospreys, gulls, brown pelicans, peregrine falcons, all of these species were heavily negatively affected by this process. Because DDT affects the calcium absorption, it's affecting the eggshell integrity. And so what was happening was all these birds were laying eggs, and then the weight of their own body just trying to incubate their eggs was crushing the egg because the shell was very thin and just malformed. So here's an example of that. In New Jersey, in the 40s, we had about 20 bald eagle nests, and that dropped to one nest in the 70s, and that nest had no successful nestlings. So really just terrible. Like there were really no eagles around, and the few that were not successfully breeding. So they were quickly heading towards localized extinction. There was a big reintroduction effort, which really helped save the eagles. So DDT was banned in 1972. This was after a lot of public uproar about it, worries that it was unsafe for people, and clearly there was this environmental damage happening. So finally it was banned in the US in the 1972. And then started about 10 years later, this really big push to try to get eagles back in New Jersey. And between 1983 and 1990, 60 eaglets were released in New Jersey. They were taken from Canada, where the population was doing really well still. They were released in New Jersey and then monitored very intensely by New Jersey Fish and Wildlife biologists. They also had another program where they were taking 12 chicks that were captively bred over time and fostering them in a nest in Cumberland County. This is a pretty successful technique. I've done it with my own chickens, where they are laying on eggs that are not actually fertile. And then if you go in and replace those with live chicks, they tend to think that they're their own chicks, and they happily will adopt them and raise them as their own. So that's a good way, a good tool with this type of thing with birds and trying to reintroduce and bump up the population levels. Here's a graph. So this was from the 2024 bald eagle report in New Jersey. The bars are showing bald eagle nests, and then the line is showing successful nestlings that were produced in those nests. So You can see over time a dramatic increase in the number of nests and successful fledglings. So 2024, there was 264 active nests. This was a record, and 288 fledglings were produced from those nests. This is a huge monitoring effort that's put forth to get this data. So not only biologists from the NJDEP, but also nonprofits such as Conserve Wildlife Foundation staff, and there's a host of volunteers that monitor these nests and come up with these numbers. There's still mortality that happens every year. It's just unavoidable. Biggest causes of death for eagles now are trauma, so probably getting hit by a car. Sometimes they get electrocuted on power lines. And sometimes it's eagle versus eagle combat. They can be very territorial and they will fight to the death. Here's a map of where those nests exist. They're found in every single county, but they are concentrated along the Delaware Bay, so that's southwest area of our state. They were removed from the endangered species list federally back in 2007. And the way that works is whatever species are put on the endangered species list federally, all states have to comply with that. But states can also make it even stricter. If they want, they can put species on their own lists for added protection. So New Jersey kept the bald eagle on their endangered list up until this year. And so great news, they were upgraded to the status of species of special concern. So when something's listed as endangered in New Jersey, it just means that the prospects of survival are in immediate danger and they need assistance to prevent extinction. A species of special concern, on the other hand, they're doing well, but they still warrant some special attention because they might still be vulnerable to threats. And bald eagles are still vulnerable to things like habitat destruction and people that might disturb a nest either by accident or on purpose. So they're still offered some protection in the state. Again, half of all these nests are in this southwest area by the bay. Here's a 2-minute video put out by the state that I think's worth taking a look at.
We have been tracking the bald eagle population since the 1980s. All through the 70s and 80s, there was really just one nest left in New Jersey as a result of the population decline that was attributed to DDT getting into the food chain. All through the 1980s, we conducted a restoration program that involved taking care of the one single nest that was still active in Cumberland County. We imported nestling eagles from Canada where they were not endangered and released them at a remote site in Cumberland County. And as a result of that, we sort of jump-started the eagle population. It was a very slow recovery at first. Eagles are very long-lived birds. It takes them a long time. But in 2021, we monitored almost 250 pairs of eagles in New Jersey. So it's really an astounding recovery of the population here. Our climber, he made the way into the nest. He was able to secure the nestling safely. We shoot for banding at 6 weeks of age, which is the best age for being able to handle these nestlings. He lowered the chick to the ground in a duffel bag. Once it's down the ground, we weigh, take a number of measurements, we take a blood sample, and then we band the chick. And we use 2 bands. One is a standard bird band and the other is a field breedable band. And those have been really important for being able to track eagles after they leave the nest. I really credit our ability to track the eagle population in New Jersey with our volunteer corps. We have over 100 people who monitor nests statewide all through the nesting season, which starts in January and goes until July. So it's quite a commitment. And these are folks who really learn a lot about eagles simply because they're out there and spending time watching them. They report on nests from Sussex County to Cape May County. We have eagles nesting in every county of New Jersey now. The eagle volunteers report on their findings to Fish and Wildlife, but also we have the Conserve Wildlife Foundation that coordinates a lot of our volunteer efforts.
Well, yeah, I like that video. It has some pretty cool footage of how they ban the birds, and just reiterates what a big effort it is, with all the volunteers and different organizations. But that's what it takes sometimes to have these success stories. All right, moving on to the turkey. And I thought this might be a good transition to mention Ben Franklin, because there's a rumor that Ben Franklin really tried to push to get the turkey to be the national emblem instead of the eagle. And this isn't quite true. There's no evidence that he did that while they were deciding to make the eagle the national emblem. But there was a letter dug up that he had written years later to his daughter where he expressed an opinion about the eagle. So on the left is the quote about the eagle. He said, "The eagle is a bird of bad moral character. He does not get his living honestly." That's referring to the eagle's tendency to steal food from other birds. Versus the turkey, in comparison, is a much more respectable bird, although a little vain and silly. He is a bird of courage that would not hesitate to attack a grenadier of British Guards. So I have to agree with him a little bit there, but I think it's pretty funny to imagine the turkey as our emblem instead of the eagle. All right, so moving on to turkey ecology. Turkeys are a very large bird. They are related to grouse and pheasants, and they can weigh anywhere from 5 to 24 pounds, with males being larger than females. So this is more classic sexual dimorphism, where males are usually larger. They have these showy colors, this big tail fan. That's all for trying to attract females and fight with males. They are the ancestor of the domesticated turkey. They can run 25 miles per hour, and they are a ground feeding bird, also known as they're ground feeding, so they don't fly much. They can fly, they're capable of flight. They don't really like to do it, but they will fly up to roost in trees at night. And they are opportunistic omnivores, which just means they will eat a host of different foods, whether that's plant material or insects, also snakes, lizards, frogs, other invertebrates. Their diet choices will change over the course of a season. So in the summertime, especially hens, when they are creating eggs and incubating eggs, and then when their eggs hatch into young turkeys, they have a really high protein need, so they will focus more on insects. Whereas as the season changes, they will switch more towards acorns and fruits and seeds, which are readily available in the fall. So they're pretty adaptable with what they eat. Here's a photo of turkeys roosting in trees. That's just what they do every single night. It just helps keep them safe from predators. And then a typical adult male turkey, also known as a tom or a gobbler. He's trying to attract a female. So on the right, you see the hen, the female. She's much more dull in color, doesn't have any of that flashiness. And that's because she is the sole gender taking care of the young. So she wants to be camouflaged. She does not want to stand out while she's raising her young. Wild turkey habitat. So they need a mixture of habitat types. This could be wooded, but also open spaces. So when they're raising their young, they need brushy habitat that has a lot of cover, a lot of grasses, again, just so they can hide and be as safe as possible from predators when the hens are raising their little ones. Also, this type of dense, brushy habitat provides a lot of insects, which again is what they need during that time. But they do also need larger trees where they can roost, and larger trees to produce those food sources when they need them in different parts of the seasons. Populations can go up and down somewhat dramatically from year to year based on weather, predation pressure, and habitat availability. Predators that might go after turkeys could be anything from coyotes to foxes to raccoons to feral cats. Especially the youngsters, they're pretty easy prey. So if there's a lot of predation pressure one year, that can definitely affect the population level the following year. They breed in the spring to early summer, and they have that classic gobble that the males use to attract the females. They nest on the ground, so here's a photo of what that looks like. They blend in perfectly. They have a nest of 8 to 12 eggs, and they just purely use camouflage to try and stay safe. Unfortunately, about 50% of young turkeys that are called poults, they will die in the first few weeks, again, because they're just easy prey. They're just, they're very small, they're very vulnerable. But once they get past that, their survivor rate goes up a lot. The issue with turkeys, the conservation issue, is twofold. And they both kind of happened at the same time, which just was devastating for their population. This included overhunting, but also habitat loss. And a huge decline. We estimate that there was about 10 million birds during European arrival to North America, so very prevalent and found in most states. But then this dropped to about 30,000 by the 1920s, and this is just an estimate again. They were completely gone from 18 of the original 39 states where they could be found, and completely gone from New Jersey by the 1800s. They were an important food source for pioneers, and there was no hunting season, there was no regulation. They were just hunted all year round with no rule. You could take as many as you want, and that was really tough on them as well. And then a huge amount of habitat loss. Forests were clear cut and not really restored afterwards. Wood was needed to build cabins and houses and for fuel, but and also a huge amount of land was then converted from forest to agriculture. So this was just too much. It got to the point where the only place you could find wild turkeys for the most part was in these really inaccessible habitats, mostly in the southeast. So these like really dense swamps where people just had a really hard time getting into. They weren't good land for logging. They weren't good land, wasn't good land for farming. So the turkeys kind of took refuge in these spots where people just couldn't really access them. And then luckily there were kind of two different things that happened again, almost simultaneously, that really helped recover the turkey. For one, there was an increase in habitat. And this happened because of two things. So in the 30s, in the 1930s, the US was undergoing the Great Depression, and there was also the Dust Bowl happening. So the price of crops was dropping. People were not able to make a living on their farms. And a lot of farms were abandoned at that time, and people were going into the cities to try to look for jobs. So a terrible time for America in terms of like people and quality of life. But that helped increase habitat for turkeys because all of this abandoned land started undergoing ecological succession. And that is a term we use for when cleared land, or even a natural area like a meadow, which might form after a disturbance like a fire or a tree falls over, that land starts becoming taken over by things like shrubs and grasses and perennials and small trees. So this type of habitat was really, really good for turkeys, especially during that breeding season when they need that type of habitat. At the same time, there was this increase in money for conservation, which is super important when you want to get things done. And also this kind of change in the shift in attitude where people are actually thinking about conservation and they wanted to make a difference and bring these animals back. So in 1937, the Pittman-Robertson Act was passed, which brought federal funding to states for wildlife management. This is still in place today, and it puts a tax on sporting goods, ammunition, I believe boat fuel, fishing gear. So whenever you buy anything like that, there's an extra tax, and that money goes straight into this federal pot that's dedicated towards wildlife management, and then it gets given out to the states. So this was a huge win for wildlife conservation, and it directly affected turkeys. So then it came to the point where, okay, we need to get turkeys from other places, just like we did with the eagles, and get them into places that don't have turkeys. The two methods used, first, they tried using pen-raised birds. So basically raising wild turkeys, but more in a pen or like farm type setting. That failed miserably because it turns out turkeys learn a lot from their mothers in the wild. They learn what their home range should look like. They learn what food sources to go for at different times of the year. They know how to respond, or they learn how to respond to different predator threats. And they also learn vocalizations. Turkeys have a very intricate social hierarchy and social interactions. So they learn all that by, following around their moms. So it turns out if you take birds that don't learn all of the skills and put them out into the wild, they don't survive, or they don't survive enough to reproduce. So that totally failed. But the reason they did that is because it's really hard to trap turkeys. On the right is what's called a pole trap. And this was a technique used by Native Americans, where they would set up these structures using small trees, and they would trench it and bait it so a turkey could get under this trap and get caught. These were clearly not very easy to set up. They weren't adaptable. Like, you couldn't just fold it up and take it to a new spot if you didn't have any luck. So this was not really working for what these biologists needed it to work for. So finally, we came up with the cannon net. And this was post-World War II. I think people liked using, trying to figure out what to use like rockets for, that the war was over. But these were like cannon propelled nets that could be detonated by someone's kind of hiding nearby in a blind, and they would bait an area. So they would wait till a whole group of turkeys would show up, push the trigger, and then a cannon would would propel this net to catch a bunch of turkeys. And that worked very, very well, and is the method that was used to help with these reintroductions. So looking specifically in New Jersey, again, by the mid-1800s, turkeys were totally gone from our state. By 1977, we had 22 birds reintroduced. And just 2 years later, biologists trapped and relocated birds around the state. I believe these were birds that were in New Jersey, but just taken to areas that had no turkeys, just to try to create new populations in areas. And then by 1981, so only 4 years, which is kind of incredible, we were able to support a hunting season in New Jersey. And then today, we have 20 to 23,000 turkeys, estimated population size, and about 3,000 are harvested each year during the hunting season. And I did just want to give a shout out to hunters. I know it's kind of a little counterintuitive to hunt something that was almost at the brink of extinction, but hunting does play a vital role in helping to conserve this species. And the National Wild Turkey Federation is just another group that's dedicated to protecting turkeys. That was also created in the 70s, but their goals are to drive habitat restoration and also support regulated hunting. So there is a New Jersey chapter. And the reality is sportsmen and women pay for 80% of wildlife conservation through the taxes that are spent on, again, those goods. So anything involving ammunition, guns, fishing, supplies, all of that money through the Pittman-Robertson Act is going towards wildlife, as well as license fees. So every time you hunt, you do have to pay a license fee through the state and sometimes federal, depending on what you're hunting. And turkey hunting itself generates $4.1 billion in economic output nationally, which is a ton of money. So yeah, really good for conservation and habitat restoration. Some might argue that wild turkeys are too successful, especially here in New Jersey. They have adapted very well to suburbia, and this can be a bit of an issue and cause some wildlife management issues in some towns. So turkeys like suburbia because they, once they realize the people there are not going to hurt them, they tend to relax pretty quickly. They like the gardens, they like bird feeders. Usually there's less predators in these areas, so they feel very safe. But they can act aggressively towards people, especially during the mating season. Male turkeys might see you as competition. They might see their reflection in your window or your car, and they're going to attack it because they think it's another male turkey. So this can cause some issues. Biggest piece of advice if this is happening in your town is just kind of give them space to do their thing. If they are acting aggressively at you, don't run. You want to make yourself look big, wave your arms, kind of yell. You have to let the turkey know that you are not submissive, you are dominant. And so kind of hold your ground, but also try to get into safety as quickly as possible. It's very rare for a turkey to actually attack someone. If that does happen, I mean, call 911, call the authorities or animal control to kind of deal with that. And moving right along to bobcats. Shout out to my former lab mate at Rutgers, Tyler Christensen. He has taken some amazing photos of bobcats in New Jersey with trail cameras that he rigs up that flash a really good light every time they're triggered. So he works very hard to get a lot of these photos, and they're pretty cool. Bobcats are New Jersey's only wild cat species. Some people might claim that there are mountain lions around, also known as cougars, and I wish that they were. They used to be here in New Jersey, but there's been no credible reporting. And with the amount of people and trail cameras and roads and, you know, high-tech cameras that people just have on their cell phones, there's just never been a verified report of one in many, many years. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no mountain lions here, but we do have the bobcat, which is about 18 to 25 pounds. So typically larger than a house cat, but a mountain lion can be upward of 200 pounds. So that's just to give you an idea of the size difference between the two. So they're much, much smaller than a mountain lion. They're about 2 feet tall. They're very elusive. They're wide ranging. They're territorial. They're solitary. All of these things make them extremely hard to study, which we'll talk about more later. And then they have that classic bobbed tail, so it's only about 5 inches long, and they also have tufted ears. But that bobbed tail is where they get their name. They don't have that really long tail that the mountain lion has. They're very adaptable predators. They eat a wide range of food, rabbits, insects, birds, rodents, really whatever they can catch. Again, they're territorial, so they don't like other bobcats in their space. They're also solitary, except for the females raising their kittens. Other than that, they like to spend time alone. They are found in all 48 contiguous states, so the whole lower 48, you can find bobcats, and they're doing very well countrywide. In terms of litters, they have 1 to 6 young per year, and they become independent from their moms at about 10 to 12 months. And they're pretty long-lived, so 12 to 13 years in the wild. The biggest issue with bobcats, the biggest conservation issue is habitat fragmentation. So same as the turkeys, we saw this massive deforestation and land use change in the 1800s and the early 1900s. So that was just devastating for bobcats. They need large patches of contiguous forest in order to make a living. And without that, they just don't do well, and their populations become very fragmented, and they don't survive. There was also unregulated hunting at the time, not so much for food, but more for their pelts. And in New Jersey, they were basically gone by the 1970s. There was one old male found in 1982, which wasn't one that had been released a few years earlier. So it means that he probably was there previously to the reintroduction effort, which I'm about to talk about. Besides that one old male, like they were essentially gone from the state. Maybe there was just a handful but that was it. I see the poll is up. Make sure you answer those questions when you get the chance. So the comeback story for bobcats also involves reintroduction. So in 1978 to 1982, 24 bobcats were taken from Maine and relocated to northern New Jersey. They have been intensely monitored ever since. They're so hard to study, but through the use of these different tools, we've done a pretty good job. So radio telemetry and GPS collars, those are great for tracking movement of the bobcats. And then there's this program called the Working Dogs for Conservation, where they train dogs to be used for conservation purposes. Here's a photo of Gretchen Fowles. She's a biologist with the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife, and this was her dog, Bear. Unfortunately, Bear passed away, but he worked for about 9 years for the department and was specifically trained to find bobcat scat, or otherwise known as poop. So Bear would track these poops, which Gretchen would then collect. And from that, you could actually do a genetic analysis and identify individual bobcats and answer all sorts of questions, like come up with population estimates, just figure out, what type of habitat these animals are using, how far they're going. So a really cool tool. Unfortunately, roadkill is another way to study bobcats. If a roadkill bobcat gets identified, a biologist may come and take a genetic sample or take some other samples just to help use it for figuring out the population. Also, trail cams are very useful as well. So current status in New Jersey, we estimate there's about 200 to 400, and mostly they're in this northwestern part of the state. So north of Route 80, but west of Route 287. So they're heavily concentrated up there. 2025 was a big year for some of these species. So bobcats were changed. They went from endangered to threatened. So they're not at this like immediate risk of becoming extinct. Their population does seem to be increasing in this northwestern part of the state. And there are more and more sightings happening in the lower part of the state, still very rare. And that's why they're still considered threatened, because they used to be wide ranging across the entire state. So we'd like to see more of them in the southern part of the state. There's a lot of work being done on bobcat habitat connectivity, which will benefit many other wildlife species. And there's a lot of agencies at play here, but in this example, the Nature Conservancy of New Jersey came up with this idea of Bobcat Alley, and you can see this graphic is changing over time. The darker green is showing areas that have been protected in recent years. So they came up with this big chunk of land located up in the Appalachian Mountains that was identified as really crucial for bobcats. And the idea here is to protect thousands of acres to help create corridors that these bobcats can use to travel from protected area to protected area. And again, this would affect like countless other species. And just going back to this idea of habitat connectivity, bobcats are not birds. Like they can't fly from one patch to the other. They have to walk there. So roads are a big issue. Unfortunately, more and more bobcats are being found as roadkill. And on one hand, that's kind of a good sign. It means their populations are increasing, but it's also very sad. And 70% of these roadkill bobcats are under 2 years old. So they're young cats. They might not be as wary of road safety. And they're also just trying to expand into new territories. They're young animals. They need to go out on their own. And those are the ones that are most likely going to get hit by a car. The other big effort is through New Jersey DEP, and that's called Change, Connecting Habitats Across New Jersey. And the big goal with Change is just similar to this, but they've created a mapping tool where you can go online and play around with it. And they're just trying to identify critical habitats that need to be connected, and also trying to pinpoint areas where, say, like a major road might do really well with some sort of structure put in place, like a wildlife corridor, or like some sort of tunnel where wildlife can cross that road safely. This was a recent sighting at Duke Farms in Hillsborough, New Jersey, which was really exciting. This was just back in March of this year, where a bobcat was caught on camera. So really cool footage. The first time ever seen at Duke Farms that they've documented. and a really good sign that these animals are starting to expand and find more suitable habitat. So really cool. And then I'm going to end with this video, and it just talks more about that change project. It heavily features some wildlife, or sorry, some bobcat footage, but it talks about other species in general that benefit from this program.
Whether they're small like a salamander or big and wide roaming like a bear, wildlife need to be able to move through the landscape to find food, shelter, and mates. All the things they need in life. Their movements can vary by season or by the need to go somewhere new, like this young bobcat's long meandering journey to find a territory of his own. New Jersey has done an outstanding job protecting open space for people and nature. Nearly a third of the state is now preserved, thanks to proactive local governments and land trusts, our Green Acres program,
Whoopsies, sorry about that.
farmland preservation, and the public, which has consistently voted in favor of open space funding. But that doesn't change the fact that we are the most densely populated state in the nation, and still growing. New Jersey is on track to reach build-out within the next few decades. The actions we take now will determine what our final landscape looks like and how much room is left for wildlife to roam. And let's talk about roads. To help all of us busy people get around, we've crisscrossed the state with a dense road network. They're convenient for us, but for wildlife, roads are dangerous barriers that often stand in the way of reaching the things they need to survive. Millions of animals die every year trying to cross roads in the US. And in New Jersey, it's almost impossible to drive anywhere and not see dead animals lying on our roadways. Roadkill is a sad but familiar fact of life, a price for our own mobility. But for some species, roads can threaten the survival of entire populations. Put simply, as our wildlands get whittled away and wedged apart by urbanization and roads, so do our wild creatures. From these challenges, change was born. Connecting habitat across New Jersey is an effort to make our landscape and roadways friendlier to wildlife on the move. Protecting important habitats, restoring corridors for movement, making roads safer to cross. These are our goals. Led by the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife, change is made up of natural resource managers, transportation planners, conservationists, and researchers who have all come together to work toward a common vision of a connected landscape. And now we have some tools to share. Our interactive map shows the most important core habitats across the state and the best opportunities to link them back together. And our guidance document presents a menu of actions for preserving critical lands, enhancing habitat, and designing effective projects to help wildlife traverse roads and other barriers. Animal species here and all across the globe are up against ever-growing pressures in our human-centric world, and the ability for wildlife to move and adapt has never been more crucial. Here in New Jersey, we've got the tools. Let's give our wild animals every chance to find their way.
Oops. Okay, cool. Why? Let's see. Okay. How do I get out of here?
That I
Well,
can't tell you.
I didn't have this issue with the last slide. Well, that's the end of my presentation. So,
Okay,
yeah, ready to take questions.
great. Thank you. That was excellent.
Thank you.
So I'll note we got a lot of comments, most of which were not questions, but I think that speaks a little bit to the fact that there's been so much recovery of these species that we all have things to say about them, interactions we've had. So, but we do have some questions, so I'll try to hit the questions that were questions. Did they cancel turkey season?
Good question. So I believe in New Jersey, they canceled the fall season. So in a lot of states, you'll have the spring season, which is like the main season where you can hunt male turkeys. And then sometimes there's a follow-up of a fall season where you can get an additional tag and hunt again. So I think in New Jersey, they did cancel the fall season only because the population is experiencing a bit of a dip. So yeah, that's like a good example of the hunting is very regulated. They're constantly looking at the population size and they will make changes accordingly. So yeah, there is definitely something happening with turkeys right now, but hopefully it's just temporary and they will rebound.
Is the ingestion of plastics an issue with any of these? Maybe particularly eagles?
Yeah, I don't know that for sure. I'm sure they have microplastics in them just because they're eating, fish, which have microplastics. I think all of us probably have microplastics in us at this point. So I don't know if it's negatively affecting them. I'm not sure if anyone's looking at that, but I'm sure they're present in all of these wildlife, unfortunately.
Are turkey vultures related to turkeys?
No, good question. The turkey vulture gets its name because it has that red head, so it kind of looks like a turkey. The other species of vulture we have is the black vulture, and they have a black head. But yeah, it's a kind of a funny name.
Um, are there any plans to reintroduce any other large megafauna? Elk was the specific question into New Jersey.
Not that I'm aware of. I believe there's elk populations in Pennsylvania, so maybe theoretically one day they could make their way here, but I doubt it. And I'm not aware of any plans to do like a formal reintroduction, but that would be pretty cool. I mean, I'm pro all the reintroductions of what wildlife used to be here, but I don't know, a lot of people probably wouldn't be happy with wolves and cougars roaming the streets.
Okay, let me look just for a second here. Well, here's kind of a general question. Are there any other species at risk?
There's a ton of species at risk. You can check out the division of, or the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. And if you just Google NJDEP, at-risk species, there's a whole list of what's covered, or what's listed as endangered, threatened, or a species of concern. A few bat species were recently added because of the threats of white nose syndrome, which is a disease that's been killing bats for many years now. But a lot of it's due to habitat loss. So it's pretty rare that a species gets taken off the list, which is why bald eagles is such an awesome story because it's an example where this worked and the protections put in place actually recovered them. But yeah, there's a lot of in New Jersey there's some species that are doing too well and then many species that are not doing well at all. But anything that's adapting to urban habitat is doing very well. So things like foxes and raccoons and certain birds like robins and crows, like all of those species are doing very well. It's the ones that are more specialized that tend to suffer more.
All right, so I'm just gonna try to hit some of the comments that were made. Um, well, first comment I wrote down is mine, which is I see in Salem County a lot eagles are eating carrion.
Mm.
So sometimes you'll see an eagle eating on something, and then there's a ring of vultures around it waiting, and then there's a ring of crows around it waiting. We had a comment that this person was one of the kids in Ocean City, New Jersey, that was riding their bike behind the DDT truck.
Seemed like a fun thing to do.
And we had a comment related to eagles that said another reason to save large trees.
Yes, definitely.
We had a comment about a turkey flying in front of somebody's windshield
Ooh.
while they were driving
Oh, yeah, they're dense birds, so they can definitely cause some damage.
and actually did break the windshield.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
One time, the same thing happened to me with a bald eagle, and luckily I didn't hit it, but it
Ooh,
was very, very close.
that's scary.
And I was just thinking, what kind of paperwork do I have to do if I kill a bald eagle?
Oh,
Also, there's a comment about turkeys flying over I-295 in the
hmm,
morning.
cool.
So yes, they can fly when they need to.
Yep.
There was a comment, thank you for addressing hunting fees and taxes that do so much for wildlife preservation.
Yep. No problem.
And we didn't have many comments on bobcats, but I will say we have a house cat here who easily weighs 25 pounds. So I think he's in contention for being a
Bobcat
big
status.
cat. Okay. There's been some more comments coming in. We have a huge problem with coyotes. Um, Specifically, they're asking about coyote wolf hybrids.
Yeah, so that's a misconception. The coyote that we have here in New Jersey is known as the eastern coyote, so it's a subspecies of coyote. It is true that they do have wolf DNA. They also have dog DNA, and that's just indicates that the path they took here, they were expanding eastward as wolf populations were very low, and coyote populations were low as they expanded. So we know that they interbred with wolves, so they are larger than the western coyote, but they're not, it's not like they're half and half. They just have some distant genetic relation to wolves and also dogs. That's why they have all sorts of coloration here in New Jersey. But so yeah, they're not technically native to New Jersey, but they are kind of filling the niche that was left by the wolf. They don't take down large prey typically, but they do a lot of cleanup. That eat a lot of rats, they eat squirrels, they eat small mammals. And they're just highly adaptable. They're found in almost every town in the state. There's been a sighting of them. So I think they're more common than people realize. And they can, have some consequences for farm animals and pets and things. But you just have to be, if you know there's coyotes around, just, make sure your small animals are protected as possible.
Well, here's a comment for you. This was the best presentation so far. Clap, clap,
Nice.
clap.
Thank you.
So we had a couple of questions about spotted lanternfly.
Oh, great.
Um, request for an update, or also the question of who to contact if you do have an infestation.
So spotted lanternfly, unfortunately, they're here to stay, and the mission of the USDA has kind of changed from trying to eradicate them to now just trying to stop the spread. So the majority of the work going on by USDA and the New Jersey Department of Ag is to try to decrease population levels around transportation hubs, so airports, seaports, trains, highway rest stops, anywhere that it's more likely there's going to be a hitchhiker. So a spotted lanternfly gets on a truck or a car or a boat and goes to another state, particularly trying to keep them out of California, where they have a lot of wine and stone fruit industry, because spotted lanternfly really like those products. So unfortunately, the chances of eradication are basically 0% at this point. We're just trying to contain them as much as possible. And if you do have an infestation, I would reach out to Rutgers or USDA or NJDA for advice. There's a lot of fact sheets out there on ways that you can control them yourself. But unfortunately, they are not going anywhere.
Okay, I think at this point I will call the question session complete. I
Cool.
think we hit most everything, and thanks everyone for sending in your comments and questions. If you haven't completed the poll and you want to do that, should go ahead and do that. We'll be wrapping things up here in a minute. Okay. Thanks a lot, Kathleen. That was great.
Yeah, no problem. It was fun.
Yeah, awesome presentation. Thank you.